I've been banging my head against my wall trying to decide what to do after the last few videos. I'd consider some of them by far my best, especially the recommendations one. The only problem is, how do you follow up your best? As the will of the Almighty would have it, me and the boys saw an amazing animation of Guts vs. Rosine, and the light bulb went off, and I thought about the interview Miura had about the Lost Children arc back in 2017. The interviewer asks if he had settled on how things would develop after the eclipse, and Miura's response was, "The Golden Age was long, so to return to Dark Guts once again, I had to display the early Black Swordsman style and remind people. That's why for the Lost Children chapter, the story style is the same as for the Slug Baron." There is more to the quote, but I'll leave it there, since the rest of it will pertain to the portion of the arc I'll get into later. After being reminded of the insane task Miura had to follow up what I believe to be the best arc in manga, I decided to delve into a short but defining period for how Berserk's story would look back with Guts in the present. Berserk once again, consistently, at its darkest and most disturbing. The first chapter doesn't begin with Guts, but with the Holy Sea Knight seeing the aftermath of the eclipse. This brief scene I won't spend too much time on, since it doesn't hold the utmost importance for the themes of this arc, but more so plants the seeds for the following arc, Conviction. Although Lost Children is a mini-arc in the Conviction arc, so sometimes if there are discussions surrounding the Berserk arcs, and Lost Children isn't included, then that most likely means it's just been lumped in with Conviction as a whole, which is fine. The visuals of a red lake as their religion prophesied, and the talks of a Hawk of Darkness is a good hook for how this group might play a larger role as the story goes on. Something Miura has always done well is providing answers while also giving the reader more questions, allowing the manga to really flow and have its own momentum from a chapter-to-chapter basis. I would never recommend reading Berserk outside of the order in which it was made, but I do think if someone were to read this arc on its own without any prior knowledge, the intrigue would be different, but the key mysteries that are being built from here on out and the themes this portion of the story will convey would still hit very hard. Some of the very important context to Guts' character being missing, however, would make him come off as a more refined first impression of the Black Swordsman Guts from the beginning of the manga, instead of the existential and introspective individual that is now barely clinging on to his humanity. So for the sake of the latter portions of this arc in your reading experience, if there happens to be someone watching this that hasn't read Berserk from beginning through the Golden Age up to here, I'm surprised you're here, but go do that first. 2-year time skip, and the scene directs us now to a group of bandits that have taken a little girl hostage while talking about a story of this haunted tree that has human faces in it. In fact, it's the tree they're right next to, but we learn the girl's name is Jill later on, and she is shortly saved by Guts, who is trying to catch some rest, but is awoken by the commotion and then has to destroy the demonic tree that confirmed the story of the bandits. The bandits don't really matter for now, other than them being the cause of Jill and Guts' fated meeting, but what does matter is the first inner dialogue we get from Jill, wondering if Guts is a forest ghost, and more importantly, her words that start at the end of chapter 95, but are expanded upon in chapter 96. It's been 2 years since the Black Sun appeared. In a certain forest deep within a mountain ravine there was a monster. It was a dreadful and fantastic spectacle, a man bearing a gigantic slab-like iron sword longer than his own body. I didn't notice this until rereading the arc for this video, and that's how important it is that Miura set Jill as the holder of perspective for this arc. It's from her point of view that we see a lot of things, the way she views Guts, the way she views the world, and this choice allows for the messages of this arc to work. This doesn't fully become apparent until the climax, but pointing it out now helps set it on the table. Once the conflict is dealt with, Puck helps ease the tension, and I think here Puck's presence as the voice of reason and comedy relief is him at his best, and he serves as the third out of 4 vital characters for Lost Children. He even breaks the fourth wall later on, remarking how the story would be too dark without him, which I totally agree with. His friendliness and bright nature in contrast with what just happened, and what we know of Berserk as a whole being met with horror by Jill, makes her statement about the elves of Misty Valley immediately draw interest and seem important, since a demonic tree that just murdered multiple people and Puck managed to draw out a similar reaction. The bandits from earlier are surrounded by elves, and as one of them remarks how this isn't a fairy tale, we get the first line of dialogue from the fourth vital character and antagonist for this arc, Rosine. It is a fairy tale. Yes, this is a fairy tale for children. This line bears more weight once we know all of Rosine's character, as we will later on, but in a vacuum, hearing a character from fucking Berserk call it a fairy tale is off-putting. Plus, it doesn't take too much to put 2 and 2 together and connect these elves with the one Jill just mentioned a page ago. This actually isn't Rosine's first appearance either. That would be back in chapter 51 in the Golden Age arc, but it's in chapter 52 where seeing her besides the Slug Count confirms any doubts. For those who remember, are aware of what her true nature is and what the true nature of these quote-unquote elves could be also. Moving into chapter 97, it gives us context into the abusive lifestyle Jill lives under, and pushes the fear of the Misty Valley elves by showing it's not just her or her imagination, but the entire village that seems to be mortified by Puck's presence when he pops out, which forces Guts to leave to avoid having to kill a bunch of civilians. I don't want to gloss over what I said about Jill and her suffering, however. Berserk is a brutal world, where it points to an unfortunate fact that not even children are exempt from being exposed to the evil that exists. It isn't explicitly shown at first what happened that caused her to be captured by the bandits, but one could assume at this point she had possibly ran away from one of the individuals that said sorry about last night, that is seen later drunk trying to enter her room as she desperately seals the door, until he goes away and Jill clings to Guts' cloak, shaking and crying. Later on, this is confirmed to be the reason she ran away and ended up captured by the bandits, and this is always and will always be the controversial aspect of Berserk. But I stand firm in the belief that stories should be allowed to delve into other evils, especially since if this wasn't the context of Jill's life, then the conflict she goes through as a character as the arc progresses, and the final message could possibly lose its weight tremendously. The evils that make us uncomfortable are the things that will stay in the back of our mind and make Jill struggle with making a choice later on make perfect sense from her perspective. Berserk, at its core, is a story that uses violence to inspire, and the dark, hopeless cruelty exists for either characters to give in or overcome. I'm saying all of this now since it does pertain to Jill, and it will pertain to her even more as it goes on, but also because this arc will only get more disturbing, evil, and explicit from here on out. Jill is presented as a very morally good and caring individual, standing up to her father when he mentions he wants to get more to drink, and even going out of her way to return some kindness to Guts by returning the cloak, and even bringing a basket of food. Puck advised her to let him sleep since he had just now gotten sleep, and something worth noting is that Jill also seemed to have not been able to sleep last night given what I had talked about earlier, and yet she has no issue falling asleep next to Guts, which I find interesting and I think could very well be what we end up seeing more of, and that's Jill's ability to see a person's character. She serves as a bit of a moral compass in this arc in the way that Puck usually does, although in a slightly different manner, and she isn't perfect in that sense either, but if not very capable of perceiving intentions in the very least. This is a giant man carrying a brick of iron, but she doesn't seem to sense the maliciousness from him that she had been clearly exposed to often from other adults. She is more at peace with this stranger than in her own home, which should be very indicative once again of just how long this terrible lifestyle has been going on. Puck's presence and Guts saving her life could be a big factor in all of that, granted, but either way, what's just as, if not more important, is how Guts reacts to all of this. He's at a stage where he doesn't do all that well with receiving kindness, but it's him taking notice of the bruising on Jill's face and hands that not only reminds him of his own past, but also that aspect of Guts that deep down isn't heartless. He isn't without humanity, no matter how dark his road gets. Still, he has an objective to carry out, a revenge-driven quest that requires more information on these quote-unquote elves, and Jill reveals that they have been causing problems for a few years, killing livestock, and more importantly, they eat people and steal children, hence the lost children from a literal sense. At that moment, the elves show up to Jill's village, and we get the confirmation that these are what we think they are, apostles. More specifically, pseudo-apostles once we learn about them, but here's where we get one of the many iconic faces in this arc. The brutality of these elves is put on display as they rip through the town like mini Tasmanian devils, and once more we get to see how much of a scumbag Jill's father is. A little boy runs out to the streets and Guts tells him to get down and uses the Dragon Slayer like a fly swatter, crushing the demonic elves with a smile on his face. The following chapter, we get to see more of these elves and their bug-like appearance up close, while Guts uses that kid he just saved as bait to kill more of them. It's a bit odd to see Guts in this stage in retrospect, where his character is solely fueled and given purpose through revenge. And I do think he has a soft spot for the innocent, but in the heat of battle, his worst qualities do come out. He isn't stupid by any means, and I'm sure the information about how they don't kill but kidnap children is what gave him the idea. He even says, quote, "Or else do you want to go with these things?" As well as you could argue the kid was already in danger, so to hell with it. I'm getting into this since this might seem a bit contradictory at first to how before this he told Jill not to come near him during the nighttime for her safety, and so questionable methods is always going to be associated with Guts. However, if the kid were to legit be in harm's way, Guts would be the type to throw himself out there to protect the child. In fact, his decision to use the boy as bait is confronted by the village people, and he calls them out for not unlocking their doors in self-preservation. Guts, with his non-chivalrous demeanor and his brutal honesty, is a very important part to his character that will serve as a big piece into what the message of this arc is and what Guts ends up representing to Jill. But before the villagers can get fully mad at Guts and then he's forced to use Jill as a fake hostage to escape since he had been poisoned by Rosine, well yeah, that. Rosine shows up at the village with more elves, Puck reveals they are human children, and once Rosine poisons Guts with her dust and goes in for the kill, she is stopped by Jill, who recognizes her after Rosine refers to Puck as Peacock. In the next chapter, after Guts apologizes for using her as a hostage, she clarifies that she believes the Queen Elf is indeed Rosine, her old friend that went missing a few years ago. When Guts goes to leave after Rosine, we get the next piece of internal dialogue. He is going. Is this it then? The end? Will it begin again, the way things always are there? Nothing changes, nothing ever happens. Like it always has been, that's the way things are. That's... And then it cuts off there. Clearly Jill is sick and tired of what her life in that village has to offer, and who can blame her? She's fed up with the reality that seems to never change no matter what happens and no matter how much time passes. It's like a gray sky that just seems to never go away. So in order to avoid going back to that reality, she follows after Guts hoping for something. Anything that isn't that. Meanwhile, Guts is ambushed by the demon fetus and spirits of burning children. I hate the idea of a Berserk live action for many reasons, but for this scene in particular, if we were to do a Berserk live action, can we get Joe Rogan and just have him recreate how to properly throw an elbow? Chapter 102, we get to see the beginning of Guts slowly losing it and giving into his urges more and more. Although that was happening a bit before, it's pretty bad now, and it will only get worse. And despite the warnings Puck gives her about regretting the choice of following Guts, she says she's come too far, only to stumble upon the sight of Guts going mad. A sadistic smile on his face as he kills these spirits and almost cuts Jill down, but his restraint kicks in. Even throwing himself off a ledge in order to protect her once again shows that his humanity is there, but that is at risk of deteriorating to the point of no return. His willpower has been supernatural, but he is only human, as is made evident when he can't move after sustaining damage from such a height, and while Jill uses Puck dust to heal him, she recounts the tale of Peacock. Long ago in a village there was a boy named Peacock, with pointed ears and red eyes. His parents loved him very much, but he was always bullied by the village children because of his eyes and ears. They called him Red-Eyed Peacock and Pointy-Eared Peacock. Peacock thought, this isn't my home. These people aren't my real parents, because neither Peacock's father nor mother, nor even one person in the whole village had red eyes or pointed ears the way he did. One night, Peacock snuck out of his house without his parents knowing. He went to find his own real parents and his own real world in which to live. He made his way alone into the forest where elves were said to live, where grown-ups said never to go. And Peacock found them. They had red eyes and pointed ears. Certainly they were the same as him. But this is what they said to the overjoyed Peacock. You're one of us. No, not true. You haven't wings to ride upon the wind like we do. Seeing Peacock's confusion, one of them informed him of something. Long ago, a human man and woman brought a baby here who was close to death from illness. We have broken the law of our village and entered this forest to save this child. This child is our life. Please, somehow save him. The man and the woman pleaded desperately. They granted the request using magic on the baby. The baby's life was saved, but in exchange for his appearance was altered to half resemble the elves. Even so, the man and woman cried tears of joy. It only mattered that their child lived. When Peacock heard this, he ran off in great haste. With tears in his eyes, he went back swiftly the way he'd come. But when Peacock returned to his house, it was all too late. For some strange reason, even though he had only been in the forest for a few moments, in the village, 100 years had passed. On top of a small hill between the village where he no longer knew a single person, and the elf forest where no human was allowed to live, Peacock the outcast cried and cried, his red eyes swollen even redder. This is a grim fairy tale that Rosine, as Jill notes, loved dearly, relating to the feeling of an unwanted outcast. Chapter 103, we get more on Rosine before her disappearance, and how she often participated in activities to keep her away from her home. As a result of a household like Jill's, that could have possibly been even worse. Jill points out not only the physical abuse, but what possibly bothered Rosine deep down in the most, and what I think to be the reason Rosine resonated heavily with the Peacock story is because of her mother being taken advantage of when the village was raided, and the father never accepting her, questioning if she was his child. As Jill states, her parents fought often, and she was always the reason. Not only do I think this could have caused her to relate to the outcast label that Peikoff wore, but unlike Peikoff, she could have very well desired the one thing Peikoff had, but didn't appreciate, the love and acceptance of his parents. Jill also notes that Rosine owned many strange things, and the strangest being what we know to be a Beylit, which Puck points out, and Guts tells Jill about the reality of what happened to Rosine, and the reason her parents disappeared after going out to look for her. This is where the conflict for Jill begins, and where the message of the arc starts to unfold. Guts' response to the fairy tale, and what he will represent to Jill, is set with this moment of dialogue from Guts that will be driven home at the end of the arc. Funny that you mentioned fairy tales. It's just like Peikoff's eyes and ears. You gotta have collateral for stuff like that. They require a sacrifice. They tell you to present what's most important to you in return for power. A few days later, her parents vanished, you said. Rosine offered them up, to have her own wish granted. Her own parents' lives as sacrifices. Let's put an end to this. This ain't some kid's fairy tale like Peikoff. It's a gruesome, grown-up fairy tale. If you stick your neck out any further, next time I'm not stopping my sword. This is no place for some kid who snuck off from a loser father and powerless mother to go wandering around in. You're a nuisance. Kids have their own fairy tales. You want to escape? Stick to Peikoff. What Guts is saying here directly contrasts the story of Peikoff and Rosine's attempt to make that a reality, and is what Jill needs to hear. Him saying he won't stop his sword next time is a literal threat, yes, but going along with how Puck earlier said she might regret sticking around, I think what Guts said can also be referring to the truth. Him not stopping his sword in a figurative sense is him not stopping the crushing weight of reality from robbing Jill of whatever innocence she has left. A dark and bleak reality that you cannot change or escape from. Hence, if you want to escape, stick to Peikoff. There is no escaping like in a children's fairy tale, which Rosine made a reality by sacrificing her parents. With Guts, there is only reality, there is only the harsh truth. Something Jill was hoping she could leave behind by following this black swordsman. Shortly after, Guts leaves and Rosine shows up, and her words, after taking on a more human appearance in the face, puts on a friendly demeanor and tells Jill exactly what she wants to hear. She will take her to Misty Valley, a place where she can play and have fun all the time, even after the sun goes down. And after another failed murder attempt by Guts, she flies away with Jill, showing her the beautiful view from the sky. And as Jill remarks, her village seems so small that she can't see it anymore. The place of her suffering, her problems. Up in the sky, her problems seem so small. Rosine remarks how she can fly all she wants to her heart's content if she becomes one of them. If Guts represents the ugly truth of reality, then Rosine represents the fairy tale lie that Jill has been looking for, the means to run away from her problems forever. This is the origin of the moral conflict within Jill that will soon reach a terrifying climax, but for now she will see if this fairy tale is too good to be true. Chapters 105 through 108 is Guts dealing with the Guardians of the Forest, some of which are the bandits from the beginning that have now been transformed, and the prototype manga version of the Ornstein and Smo fight. The Holy Knights stop by Jill's town saying they are in search of the Black Swordsman, given how they believe he might have something to do with their religion, and Jill's shitty father in need of battle decides to tag along in search. Chapter 108, however, continues with Puck entering Misty Valley, and he sees the false elves playing as he can't help himself but join them in their game of catch, it seems. Miura making this such a beautiful place and still portraying the childlike and innocent nature of these killer elves at times is what makes what happens after so disturbing. The first sign is when they hand Puck the ball, which turns out to be a human eyeball. Rosine arrives with Jill, and her first impression is that this is paradise, which again, considering how she has always been hurt by grown-ups, a place where there are no grown-ups, therefore in her mind no evil, seems like the place to be. Chapter 109 is one of the most haunting chapters, not just in the arc but in all of Berserk, and the reason I believe the arc hasn't been adapted into an anime. Jill starts to question things, still needing more time. She thinks that possibly what they do isn't so bad. If elves eat humans the same way humans eat animals. She at first turns to Puck asking him what she should do, and he immediately points out these elves are monsters, but it's clear in Jill's mind as she recollects her memories that they can't be bigger monsters than the one she knows back home. I can't find it. For me, I can't find anything more enjoyable than those little ones. Being hungry and cold, worrying about the weather every day, afraid of bandits, afraid of war, from now on, forever and ever. Puck is the ultimate empath and feels her fear, and tries to point out the good things she has in life like her mother, and offers an optimistic look on the future. But Jill, while sitting in what she believes to be paradise, looks at her future with heavy pessimism. One could say realistic pessimism, honestly, that hits most people once they start to grow older, lamenting how she will most likely turn out like one of her parents, either passively neglectful or abusive. But then the fairy tale and those who inhabit it show its true nature. The little fake elves line up and take formations as if they're about to play war, a fun little game that turns out to be real, as they savagely pierce into one another and murder each other with a horrifying grin on their face, as they laugh and dance, holding up the mutilated bodies of their friends. They dance. And then Jill remarks, "Only humans can enjoy killing like that. Only humans or else." And then Puck says, "Monsters." One of the elves is being chased and then is chased down, and it cries out, "Adult attack, adult attack." Witnessing this is traumatic enough, but witnessing this as a victim of such an atrocity like Jill is, warrants her reaction of pure shock and vomit. This is the reality of the fairy tale, the things Guts witnessed firsthand with someone who tried to escape their reality. There are no elves, and this is no paradise. These are humans that have abandoned their humanity to live in a place where they are given absolute freedom. And absolute freedom in the hands of what is or what once was human is utter chaos. They are free from the adults, free from the problems, but are also free of any remorse or restriction on their behavior. This paradise is no better than the cruel, harsh world that exists. Chapter 110, Jill running away with Puck stumbles into the nesting ground where the children that are kidnapped are turned into elves. Rosine shows up trying to preserve the fairy tale, saying they were just playing war. Ah yes, the good old memories, back when me and my friends at recess would viciously butcher each other before 4th grade English. She says they were just playing war, and if she returns home, she will not only have to suffer with real war, but also with all the other things Jill has been trying to escape from. Before she can fully accept and give in, she's shaken out of it by the horrifying image of a broken egg, and in comes Guts, ready to burn the fairy tale to the ground. At the end of the chapter, we get another piece from Jill's perspective, and that in contrast of Rosine and the elves versus Guts in the fire. Why for an instant, swaying inside the blaze, he was the one who looked more like a terrifying monster to me. Guts slowly becoming more monstrous throughout this fight is one of the most memorable things for those who read it. His anger and violence, the desire to destroy his target no matter the cost on full display. Once again having a sadistic smile when he realizes he can run into the fire to kill the elves and put it out by using the insides of the cocoon. The shot of Guts biting into the intestine is so far removed from the man that gave his cloak to Jill. Even Rosine remarks if he is even human. Here I want to finish Miura's quote about writing this similar to the Black Swordsman arc, but with a different intention regarding Guts and his opposition, the quote from earlier back in 2017. The same is true in respect that in the flashback scene, the monster's humanity emerges, and when he defeats her, Guts is the one who looks like a monster. It couldn't be exactly the same though, so I featured Rosine, the oddball apostle. It's fascinating how we have one character we just spent an entire arc becoming familiar with and growing sympathetic towards, and yet visually Miura shows him as a monster, in contrast to Rosine from Jill's perspective. Rosine having that fairy tale-like appearance, and Guts being the ugly reality. A monster in a different sense that grows more fierce when faced with danger. A forest ghost, those were the words that went through my mind when I first saw him, lit by that lightning flash. But he, the man in front of me right now, is nothing so gentle as that. The fight continues and Rosine transforms, revealing her true self, pointing out how everything is too late to save because of the fire, but it doesn't matter because she can make a new one. Once again, she can escape, but first she needs to punish the one who destroyed her paradise. Chapter 113 is more of the fight, now ramping up in intensity as Rosine is at her fastest and deadliest. There isn't much for me to say about this chapter, other than once again the lengths Guts is willing to put himself through to kill an apostle. And I'll throw this out there, cause why not, but even though I think Miura's best art is in the Millennium Falcon, style-wise I have a soft spot for this arc and Conviction. When Guts shoots his arm cannon through Rosine, the shot after with them falling out of the sky is one of the many things with this fight I need to see animated. Chapter 114, titled The Space Between Demon and Man, Guts questions the reason for his failure, the thing holding him back, questioning if it's her childlike appearance or Jill's story that has caused him to show restraint. The temptation to abandon his humanity, or at least put it aside for a moment, overtakes Guts. Once again, we get an iconic shot of Guts giving in. Black it out. One more time. I'll take my urge to kill and black everything else out. For this portion of the arc in the fight, we get Guts' inner thoughts and perspective. He is snapped out of it when he sees Jill is in danger, but blacks everything out and decides to use Jill as an advantage to put an end to Rosine. His murderous urges take hold, and for this moment, he blacks it all out, closing the space between demon and man. Jill, overwhelmed by the situation, breaks down, having to face the crushing weight that she knew the truth all along to and didn't want to accept. She was so desperate to find the answer she wanted, whether it was in Guts or Rosine, an escape, but now she sits doomed, surrounded by the fires. Rosine shows up once again, trying to offer a way out, and Guts, hiding in the flames, shoots and splits Rosine open, pushing Jill into the flames. But despite using Jill as bait for a moment, he still has humanity somewhere in that blacked out form, kicking open a cocoon to stop Jill from catching fire, but it also results in a corpse opening on the poor girl, and when Puck goes to check on her, Jill has a crazed smile. The vile imagery she has been exposed to, along with the weight of it all, mentally and emotionally overwhelms her. I'm not going to delve into Guts and the Beast of Darkness, since that would entail more of a conviction arc as a whole, and it's something I've talked about many times in different videos, but this is the portion of the story that really shows Guts becoming something darker than what we saw in Black Swordsman and Golden Age. The fight is taken back up to the sky, and in the next chapter, we get a glimpse into Rosine's backstory, the scene that humanizes her character. For a moment, we see her finding the Misty Valley and freely running through the grass as if she was flying. In the present, she tries to end it, but her attempt proves useless as we get the most iconic shot of this arc, and one of the most iconic in the entire series. Rosine now with the face of terror as she looks at a monster she can't kill, and a slice through the collarbone, sending them both crashing down to the earth. In her final moments, we see the full Rosine backstory. The elves weren't there. She waited for days and they never showed up. She never really did believe in them. She was just hoping for an escape, the one she would then create for herself and for Jill. Her parents arrive, and although her mother embraces her in concern, her father lashes out in anger and beats Rosine. The mother tries to intervene, but is met with the same fist. Years of abuse and rejection, of pain and sorrow, and now there were no elves. No place she could escape to and leave all of that misery behind. I think in this sense, the reason she was so obsessed with Jill was not only because it was her old-time friend, but because I think Rosine saw a lot of her past self in Jill, the past self that was searching for an escape that wasn't there. In despair, she wishes for it all to go away, and the Beylet is activated. In the present, she asks her mother and even her father to forgive her, and crashing to the earth, she is now once again in her more human form. I believe Miura was very intentional with what he did visually, given the timing of the backstory as well, in contrast with what he has done with Guts visually as the fight grows more intense, but even after it's over, as he stated in the interview. He has made us sympathetic to Rosine, showing that she was once in a position where Jill was just moments ago, and was simply a little girl wanting to escape a cruel world and run away through a fairy tale. He has taken this monster and made her very vulnerable, very human, while taking the good guy of our story, the human, and making him seem like a monster. And not in a cliche way, but in a way that actually impacts. And there is a big difference in humanizing a villain and allowing us, the reader, to understand their actions from their perspective, making us question if we would make the same choice if given the power to choose. A question brought up in the previous arc with Griffith. I think that is very different from absolving the character from their wrongs. But the key difference here is, with Griffith's punishment, while excessive in many ways, a lot of it was his own fault, and he had already done many morally reprehensible things beforehand. But with Rosine, before sacrificing her parents and what she would do as an apostle, what was her fault? The same as Jill. Nothing, simply children living in a dark and cruel world, destined to live in it the rest of their lives. Even after the horrors this bitch was responsible for, I'm amazed at how I still felt immense sadness, and when she laments there not being any elves in the first place, and then is reminded of Puck as Jill with teary eyes show her elves were real all along, and Puck even says they once did live in this Misty Valley. Only for the chapter to end with the good guy of our story emerging from the waters he fell in like a demon hell-bent on murder. Chapter 116, Rosine states that even with the bad stuff, Jill will be alright, and from her peaceful expression it transitions to Guts, consumed by his hatred and bloodlust, ready to finish the job for good. Jill begs Guts to stop, but it falls on deaf ears, and even when Jill covers Rosine, it seems Guts was going to follow through, even if it meant finally harming Jill himself. This moment, Miura flipped the script and made the good guy seem like he was about to become the irredeemable demon. But before he can follow through, he is shot by Jill's father, who had found them with the Holy Sea Knights, and Guts runs off into the darkness. Meanwhile, Rosine flies off, hallucinating that she has a way back home, that she can return to her parents. As she comes crashing down in her moment of death, once again the fairy tale's ending is quoted. On top of a small hill between the village, where he no longer knew a single person, and the elf forest, where no human was allowed to live, Peacock the outcast cried and cried, his red eyes swollen even redder. There's nothing good that comes from trying to abandon reality. One's life, no matter how bad it might be, we cannot escape from it like magic. In real life, this doesn't present itself in the form of a bailet, but we all have things that we use to escape the day-to-day for a moment, which is fine, but at some point we have to come back to the real world that exists. We cannot try to escape the truth forever, because the consequences are far too steep. Jill now knows that running away with Rosine is not an option. That kind of fairy tale doesn't exist. For humans, it is either suffer as human or lose your humanity, but perhaps she can still leave her village behind at least, find some other place. Chapter 117, she says that she refuses to leave things the way they are. After all of that she had gone through, surely there is something other than returning home to that cruel place where she is forced to feel fear and struggle every day in a life she can't change. Catching up to Guts, she points out how he saved her. She knows Guts isn't the monster she saw moments ago and begs him to take her somewhere that isn't here. She doesn't care. Here we get the ugly truth Guts represents at its fullest. The sword is no longer held back. Look. Take a good look around us. A good hard look at the shadows. At the darkness around me. You said somewhere that's not here. This is that somewhere. The verge of our world. This place is adrift where the dead cling to the living, drowning in jealousy and yearning. A garbage heap of losers. You said you don't care where. Well, what you see is what you get. This is your paradise. The spirits cling on to Jill and Guts swipes them away. The weight of the truth once again is too much for Jill as she collapses and begins to cry. And Guts, protecting her, says one of his most important lines, something he had to learn the hard way through experience. There's no paradise for you to escape to. What you'll find, what's there, is just a battlefield. He leaves, and as he fades away, he tells her to go home, to go back to her battlefield. The final part of this chapter and arc, we get Jill's response to all that she has been through, now faced with the truth she can't deny, as she has seen it all for herself. This portion shows how Berserk uses its violence to inspire, and contrasts a bleak and dark setting with the beauty of its messages. He disappeared into the darkness. In the end, I still don't know who he was. Just like when he appeared, he took the demons with him. I was the only one left behind. I still don't know what these past days of fear, sadness, and shock were to me. The mist cleared away. The mist that would never go away was pushed out by the flames. The clear sky now peeks through. But it's by no means a spectacle that makes my heart leap, like when I flew in the sky with Rosine. It's savage, lonely, cold, but such a vivid sky. It's a clear sky like the kind after a storm blows through. I don't have wings, so I guess I'll look up at this sky and crawl along the earth. Maybe the fluid from the cocoon he doused me with mixed with Rosine's blood washed away my childhood. Jill now no longer sees the future as a grim thing she cannot change. Hopeless or something to run away from, as the mist she thought would last her whole life was blown away by the fire Guts caused. So too shall the bad moments pass. Puck asks if she will be okay, and here we get Jill's answer to the ugly dark truth that Guts represents, that now doesn't seem as ugly and dark. I guess I don't think I can be violent like the swordsman after all. And I guess I really don't have the courage to run away like Rosine did. But at least I think I'll try crying and shouting and biting my way through. Maybe I can change something. She asks Puck why he travels with Guts, and then remarks how elves look best in the blue sky. She can't run away, and she can't depend on someone else to fight her battles for her, or participate in their battlefield relying on their strength. The answer is for her to face life head-on in her own way. Struggle, contend, and endure. In a tiny village nestled in a ravine, difficult to see even from the air, I think I'm about to start my own tiny battle. This is the fairy tale for adults that Guts was referring to, a gruesome one, where all that exists is a battlefield we are forced to live with, but one that in our own ways we can survive and overcome time and time again. An arc full of some of the most horrifying and disturbing imagery I've ever seen, but with some of the most essential lessons for how to go about living, with a more optimistic approach than the one we entered with. Each of these characters, and each of us, are lost children trying to find our way in this grand battlefield we will be in until the day we die. So how did Miura follow up his best? It was by setting the bar once again, but in a different way. with another masterpiece. Rest in peace, the great Kentaro Miura.